Ready. Senator, let's start with you, please.
Okay. So I'm Chris Gorsuch. I am in Senate District 25, and Senate District 25 are the small or smaller urban areas in East County, so Gresham, Troutdale, Wood Village, and Fairview.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you served in the legislature? What did you do before that?
I was born in Portland, grew up in the Woodstock district back when it was a working class neighborhood. It's changed a little bit since then. Went to a private Catholic school, then went to Franklin High School, and then did education at PCC. Because I wanted to become a police officer, and you needed 2 years to do that. It took me a little more than 2 years, but I got my 2 years and got hired by the Portland Police. Did that for several years, and then I went back to school and got my master's, or my undergrad, my master's from U of O, and then a doctorate from Portland State in Urban Studies. I have 3 children. And my wife and I have lived in East County for quite a long time. And when I worked in the police bureau, I also lived in East County. So probably 30 years of my adult life.
Why did you leave the police bureau?
I wanted to work more on policy instead of carrying out other people's policies. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that I could be more productive in terms of public service by going into first education and then into politics.
How did you make your, are you retired from teaching now, or are you still teaching?
Just this past couple of weeks, on September 1st, I retired from Mount Hood.
What did you teach there?
I was there for 26 and a half years, seems hard to believe. It was in social science, and I was the full-time person for geography and criminal justice.
Did you do GIS, or was it?
I did a little bit of GIS. Frequently that was done by a guy in the science division, but I did do some of that myself.
Okay. How long have you served in the legislature?
4 terms in the House, and this is my first term in the Senate.
Okay, great.
So I first started in 2013.
Okay. Raymond, tell us about yourself, please.
So my name is Raymond Love. I'm running for Senate District 25 as well, Republican side of the political spectrum, if you will. Grew up in the old Columbia Villa before they tore it down in 2003. In 2003, we eventually moved to Gresham, where I married my wife. We've been there ever since. I have 2 boys and a girl. My boys are 15 and 18, and my daughter is almost 30 now. So when I got out of the Columbia Villa, I joined the Army at 17, after my sophomore or junior year in high school. Mm-hmm. Went back after my senior year for, they call it AIT or training. And now I've worked my way up from private to currently still in the Army Reserves, full bird colonel. If all goes well, I could get a star and become a general officer. I share his passion for policy. I think that's where a lot of decisions are made that impact people's lives a lot more than what happens on the execution side of the table. So that's part of the reason why I'm running, because I think I can implement policies and get policies to make people in Rockwood better. My perspective is I came from essentially the North Portland version of Rockwood, and I asked myself, why do black and brown people have to have crappier streets than people of other denominations and colors? And so I've kind of tried to turn that into some policies that make more sense for those of us who literally ate government cheese like I. Although government cheese is good for grilled cheese sandwiches.
There you go.
So I kind of miss government cheese for that fact alone.
Prior to getting into this race, what kind of civic engagement have you had?
So I ran for the Gresham City Council in 2020. I did not win that race because I was naive enough to believe that good morals and ethics and plans is what gets you elected, and I have since learned that you had to get a lot of money and a lot of people backing you, and so
I forget, who did you lose to in that race?
I lost to Dixon. He was
The guy who's moving up to the Multnomah County Commission.
correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So learned a lot in that race
Yeah.
about politics, and I think the thing that I learned the most is you really have to have a vision of what you can deliver for people, so that when you're talking to them, I've been walking all over East County, talking to the people,
Yeah.
and the economy is terrible. There's a lot of money in Salem, and the policyholders there, to include Chris, are not putting it where it could go.
Uh-huh.
So want to change that.
What, just want to pursue that line of questioning a little bit more. So have you sat on any committees, boards, been engaged in your kids' school, coached any of those kind of classic?
I have not coached. I have chosen not to sit on committees because while I think they can be effective, I've always believed that leadership sort of starts from the top. I've dedicated my entire career to that end. That's why I went from a private to a full-bird colonel. If you're not in the Army and have no appreciation for that, that is like a top 5% type of thing to accomplish. And what I learned in that journey is you have to be in a position of I don't know if power is the right word, but influence, to be able to make things happen. And while committees are good, they effectively are information resources and things for people in positions to actually make votes, as Chris has. And so if I'm in a position to make votes, then you will feel the impact of my opinions. If I sit on a committee, it may never see the light of day.
So what is your time commitment in the reserves?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
How much time do you spend either in uniform or working on
Great question.
military issues?
It's a great question. So I joined in 1990, and when I joined, I put my hand up and swore to defend the nation, foreign against domestic, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. In reality, I've been mobilized to active duty 6 different times for a minimum of a year. When you add it all up, I have basically the equivalence of 16 years worth of active duty. If you just took it all and said, how much time have I committed over the last 34 years? It's roughly 16 years. So right now I'm in that reserve status. So theoretically, I'm doing 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. Sure.
Let me ask a kind of annoying question that reporters
That's
always
okay.
ask, which is to try and consolidate. What have you learned in your service, in your military service, that you think would be particularly useful to a lawmaker?
So one of the things that I think you learn by serving people is your greatest attribute is serving the people, like actually doing things that benefit, in my case, often my subordinates, but more often my peers. So I have learned to work up and down sort of the power structure. So in order to be effective as a leader, you have to work with people who are like colleagues, and then you also have to work for the people who fall underneath you in a traditional sort of command relationship. But probably the most important thing is you all have to be doing that for the benefit of the American people, the people that we're sworn to defend. And so what happens when you're in those back rooms and you're making decisions about policy, those people aren't in the room to have a voice. The people that I grew up with in the Columbia Villa, they never sat in a room like this. They never sat with a governor like I have. They have not sat with other people that can make dramatic differences in their lives. And so I just told myself, I start off in the villa and now I can go and have private meetings with high-ranking people that I would have never had the opportunity to do. And that a lot has to do with the fabulous career that I had in the military. I learned to navigate that process.
I believe you run an insurance agency, is
I
that
do.
correct? So how long has that been your primary
Income.
work? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a fabulous. So again, I call it hero to zero. I don't know if I'm a hero, but I started out with 0 customers, and we're at about 3,100 now. So
Wow.
it takes a while in the insurance business to do that. So I had no policies. Now I have 3,100. My goal is to retire right around the 6,000 mark. So I'm attempting to open another agency. So it's been very well to me. But again, you have to learn sort of when you don't have one single customer, how do I get you to not only buy auto insurance from me, but renew over and over and over for years.
Great. So he's here to retire you.
Yes.
So let's talk about, I know you had a health issue
Oh, yeah.
last session,
Right.
but you're a co-chair of a very powerful committee, the Joint
Yeah.
Transportation Committee.
That's correct.
Tell us what you did in your most recent term that is an example of why voters should return you to your
Oh,
position.
sure. So the good thing about the surgery, the heart surgery I had, was that I stayed in contact with my staff. This was in 22, and we were able to pass still several pieces of legislation. In 23, we passed the debt relief bill, and that was a bill that was originated by SEIU, and it was designed to keep people from losing too much of their money and being forced, if they got into trouble with debt, being forced out of their homes and onto the street. The other one that we worked on was one with AFSCME, and it has to do, in fact, I was just at a meeting yesterday or the day before about this, has to do with trying to get more home health care workers into the system and to also protect their well-being when they're frequently, for instance, working by themselves. We heard some really seriously disturbing stories a couple days ago.
When you say into the system, do you mean get more of them hired?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so
And so-
you got to create a funding stream for that, or is it mostly Medicare funded?
I think a lot of it is Medicare.
Yeah.
I know that we didn't pass that piece. I worked on that legislation, but there is a work group currently working on that one, whereas we did pass the debt relief bill.
Okay, so tell me, as co-chair of the committee that works with ODOT most closely, we know that you've been going around the state this
Yes.
year on a road show, and that the ultimate goal is to ask voters to support a funding package. So as an agency, what letter grade would you give ODOT in terms of its performance right now?
I would say, considering their budget issues, a C.
Okay. What would you like to see other than more money, which is an easy answer and
Right.
not necessarily going to happen, probably will, whatever. Well, how could the agency do a better job exclusive of the funding issue?
Well, I think the agency needs to do more self-study. I think that we need to make sure, and this is true of all state agencies, it's very important for us to evaluate the programs that are putting out a product for citizens and make sure that we're doing it right and make sure that we're not wasting money. And ODOT definitely, I think, has some challenges there. And so I'm very much interested in audits and support audits, especially for an agency like ODOT.
Okay. Raymond, I noticed in your voters pamphlet statement that you would like to give a tax break for tipped income.
Absolutely.
So tell me about that.
So when I was growing up, one of the first jobs I took, and I don't even know if they're in business anymore, but it was right around the corner from here, actually, Ezekiel's Wheel. And I was a hardworking young kid and getting minimum wage, and it always struck me, and that was my very first, I don't know if it was my very first job, but it was really close, one of those first jobs as a kid. And I remember being a busboy in the back and coming out and doing the opening and laying tables out, which is common in the 21st area. You put the tables out and everything. And people would just offer me a tip. And back then, I found out that they would do it often by talking to the server and some other like nuances of how that stuff works. And fast forward 20-something years, and basically from a hard worker perspective, you're not rewarded when you go out of your way to do a particularly good job. In fact, it's gotten so bad now that essentially, as we all know, you are almost expected to tip whether you do a good job or not. And so I think if you go back to incentivizing people and literally making it more successful to do the right thing, be a good person, it will change. More so, it's not as much of a money thing as a cultural thing. We have a cultural problem right now in the country of people not being rewarded for hard work, people believing that another government program, more funding, things like of that nature are what's going to help them. And what got me out of the Columbia Villa was not whether or not my tip was taxed. It was me recognizing that hard work is what was going to make a difference in my life. And it did. I've worked very hard and I've been rewarded very nicely for my hard work. And I think other people want that opportunity.
So would you favor increasing the minimum wage?
No, I'm not a big fan of increasing minimum wages. I think that there's a lot of value in starting out at the bottom. I started out as a private in the military. My first LES, they call it, it's like your pay stub for the military. I still have it because I just think it's funny. And it was like $42 for 2 days duty in 1990. And you don't appreciate that until now as a full bird colonel. And I won't say what I make, but you can Google it. It's a lot nicer for 2 days of duty.
I guess
that's the product of a lot of hard work.
So is it that if you increase the minimum wage, you're giving somebody something for nothing? Because in effect, by giving people a tax credit or a tax break on tipped income, you're letting them keep more of the money they earn.
Absolutely.
Same by raising the minimum wage, you're letting people make more who are at the lower end of the pay scale. But so what, I would love for you to explain to me how you think those are different.
So I think the difference is that you have to kind of zoom out and at the 30,000 foot level understand economics and how economics work. When you increase the availability of the labor pool, you increase the availability of the jobs pool, you get more people willing to do more for less. And when you do that, you incentivize people to, it's a barrier to entry. If you make it difficult for people to come into the workforce, then it makes everything more expensive. So I, as a young kid, took jobs. I once baled hay. I'm sure the guy didn't legally follow whatever the guidelines were because I didn't make enough. I found out years later that probably what he did was illegal. But I loved working out, baling hay for a summer. And I could tell you the name of the guy that hired me, but he's deceased. But so I saw nothing wrong with it as a young kid. Yes, I'll go and bust my butt and hurt myself for what effectively was probably 30% less than what the minimum wage would have been, but I did it gladly and I'd do it again. And that type of mentality is what we need to get back to. If people felt like if I work really hard at $12 or whatever the minimum wage is, look how hard they'll work if they have an opportunity at 10 to get to 12, to get to 14. When you continue to raise the bar and say, we'll pay you X amount no matter how hard you work, I don't believe people work harder. And I don't think you need to look any further than the current generation. There are a lot of people who have jobs making $17, $18 an hour that are not doing the level of work that was done even 5 years ago.
Okay. Is there a particular vote that Senator Gorsuch took or a position that he has taken in Salem that you would highlight and say, I would have voted differently, or that's a bad vote and here's why?
Yes, I have it on my pamphlet. I've been handing it out to voters all over East County.
Okay.
There's about 6 of them, if I recall. A couple of them, sort of the highlight one.
Sure.
One, he supported Mike Schmidt, which was not the best endorsement out there, although that's not policy. It was not a good decision. Okay. He passed or supported a bill to basically allow people to set up tent cities, which I don't think was a good idea.
Which bill is that?
I forgot the House bill number. I have it in my truck, and I'm sure
It's,
he
it's
knows.
you're talking about the bill that made an objectively reasonable place for people to go. It was the Martin v. Boise bill.
I don't remember the name of
Yeah,
it.
okay.
I wasn't a politician at the
Okay,
time,
okay,
and I'm still
all right.
not a politician.
All right.
I'm just not a fan of policies that allow, for example, another one he passed allowed sort of the no bail type of law that allows people to just basically commit a crime and then turn around and be right back on the streets. So my perspective goes back again to being in the Columbia Villa, surrounded by a lot of people who did bad things. People were shot at the old Pay and Take It. It's out of business now, but it was like a Thriftway type of store. And I literally witnessed people. This was back when people would shoot you from 5 feet away. So they would literally walk up and take a shot and take you out. And so as a young child, you can literally see these interaction between gang members and stuff. And my mom, who was just the greatest mom ever, and she is still, had a culture, her and the other moms, and what I saw, like in hindsight, was this isn't always a money thing. This isn't always police or policy. It's about people caring about people. And they had I call them the mom mafia, right? So you knew not to come in our little area of the villa. Even the hardcore thugs knew to stay away, because those mothers set a tone that said, we're not going to tolerate crime in this neighborhood. We're not going to let you walk through and throw your cup down. A lot of the policies that unfortunately him and the Democratic Party lead to that lawlessness that then leads to other more serious behaviors. And so that's why I've not been a fan of his policies.
Okay. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, first off, I think that's a pretty broad brush to say that our policies lead to lawlessness. The attempts by myself and my colleagues are to improve people's lives. And we know that that means that you have to take on the criminal justice system. And yep, I did support the current DA. And the reason for that is I worked with him very closely on both the bill to take care of or to increase the punishments for street racing, and I also worked very closely with him to stop catalytic converter thefts. And in Gresham, the statistic that recently came out was 85 or 84% reduction in those thefts in Gresham. So we are trying to do things in a humane way. We are not trying to have things be lawless. And I can tell you, there's a big difference between Senate District 25 and the city of Portland. And I think if you go back and you look at the history, a lot of that had to do with Portland backing away.
Oh, sorry,
Uh-oh.
that happens.
It's a motion sensitive.
There it is.
Yeah.
A lot of that also was because Portland backed away from supporting law enforcement. And I understand that we have to hold law enforcement accountable, but at the same time, you can't defund them.
So let's talk about bail.
Oh, sure.
So you were a police officer who arrested a lot of people.
Yeah.
Your opponent grew up in Columbia Villa. So let me hear your philosophy on bail, and then I'd like to hear your opponent's philosophy on bail.
Sure. And in fact, in my early career at Portland Police, I worked in St. John's and the Columbia Villa, so I know it very well from the past. What I can tell you is the concern about bail is that you end up making it very difficult for low-income people to make bail. And so the push, and a push by many judges also in our system, was to make that so that you don't have people sitting for long periods of time in jail. And so that was the push to...
Pre-trial, you mean?
Yeah, pre-trial, right. That was the push, pre-trial. And I know that the Chief Justice the previous one and the current one, they were both very much interested in not having people sit for long periods of time pre-trial. Of course, we have a problem with that. One thing that we've struggled with in the Public Safety Subcommittee is that we don't have enough money for public defenders. And so we end up having people still sitting because they can't get a public defender. So that's a piece that we still need to work on so that we don't have people waiting in jail.
I think, and I don't mean this, you don't choose how you're born. But as I was sitting listening to him, I thought to myself, you know, if you're a, however old he is, white guy, you have a much different perspective. So as a minority and someone who's had encounters with the police, and while I haven't been detained at any length of time for, you know, anything, I learned very early on that kind of the reference that I made to my mother and the mom mafia, if you take responsibility, hold people accountable for the little things, it tends to lead to less bad things happening. It's just, if you know, your readers can go Google broken windows policing. Giuliani did it in New York City, one of the most dangerous places in the world right now, thanks to some Democratic policies that don't agree with it. But when he did it, it dropped crime dramatically. And the way that you do it is similar to what my mom did. You don't allow people to litter. You don't allow them to do jaywalking. You don't allow those sorts of behaviors. When they finally do get arrested and we come to this bail issue, they need to be held accountable. So if I, as black guy, 15 years old, 18 years old, get arrested by the Portland police, and I fear, because it's the reality, that I will be detained and it'll cost my mom $1,000 or more to get me out of jail, there's both incentive on my mom's part to perhaps let me sit there for a day, you know, and think about my poor actions. Still reasonable enough to get out if it's, you know, warranted. But if it's a more major offense, and this is not my first rodeo, and I've repeated crimes over and over and over again, and the system is saying, well, poor little black Raymond, he doesn't have a lot of money, so we'll just let him out of jail and continue to repeat the bad things over and over again, then you create the lawlessness that we have now. And then basically what that has ultimately resulted in, because him and some other public officials that I won't name in East County believe crime has actually gone down. And the reason why it's gone down, according to the way they look at it, is people have stopped reporting it. So people used to report, you know, when someone walks into Goodwill and walks out with a handful of stuff without paying. Now we all just know that the police don't have the resources because of the defunding actions of his party. They don't have the manpower to follow up on things. And probably the most important thing is they don't have the leadership. You know, I don't think I've ever seen him on TV. You might have, but I don't see him on TV saying, hey, crime is not tolerated in East County, and we have the backs of our officers, and we will help eliminate crime. So the bail situation
I'd really like to react to this, please.
Sure. Yeah,
Absolutely,
we'll
but the bail situation sets that tone
How
of
you
lack of accountability.
how you explained it with the black kids sitting in jail.
Correct.
Well, that's what we're trying to avoid, is having poor people sitting in jail.
Correct.
It's nothing about race.
Well, it is
I
about
know
race when you
race
make it about
plays
race.
it,
Right.
plays into it, but it is not the situation where we're all going, you know, having a nice tea party and saying, let's just let people do whatever they want. The other thing is, if it's a low-level crime, there's a big difference between that and higher-level crimes. So this idea, your idea, is somewhat draconian. You believe that you got to really put the hammer down on people, and I disagree with that completely. I don't think it's just that. Also, broken windows, that was Wilson and Kelling. It was done long before Giuliani. And it is a very important community policing tool that I think the city of Portland's gotten away from.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you agree on
I do.
broken windows. Maybe we can partner together and get it back
Sure.
implemented.
I'd like to give you each an opportunity to ask your opponent a question.
Oh, sure.
We do this to try and find contrasts between candidates, and we do this because you know each other better than we know you, and so it's an opportunity for you to highlight something that you would like us to think about your opponent. So please make it a question that can be answered. Don't make it a statement.
Okay.
And we'll let Raymond, we'll let you go first.
So first, to clarify, I don't know Chris that well.
Okay.
And when I've gone door knocking, neither do the constituents. So I don't know him personally. I just want to clarify that.
Well, I don't expect you to know him
I
personally.
think this is the
expect you to
second time I've met him.
I expect you to know his record and his
Oh, okay.
policies.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yes.
I know his record, and it is not good. So my question would be, and this is just to make it real simple, that's something he should be very familiar with. He sits on the transportation committee. We all know that's a very large committee with a lot of money and resources.
Yes.
And just this morning, if you want to Google it, they shut down one of the major arteries in Gresham, East County. The Troutdale Bridge is no longer functioning. It's essentially unsafe to travel.
Yeah.
That's right.
He sits on the transportation committee. He presumably would know that. He loves talking about, as he did earlier, auditing and being accountable and all that. I don't know how you let a bridge in the county that you represent as a senator deteriorate to the point where abruptly thousands of people's lives are going to be impacted. So maybe you could talk a little about how that happened.
Sure.
And how that's not on you, presumably.
Well, look, I don't do day-to-day work on bridges. The Multnomah County folks are responsible for that bridge. No one had indicated to my office that that bridge was in danger. We do know, because I think of things like the navigation pieces on your phone, that they have frequently ended up with semis that are not suitable for that bridge. And there have been a number of cases where damage has occurred. So the whole reason we're doing the transportation
So you knew there
roadshow.
was an issue?
No, I didn't know. How would I know that?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said you knew that trucks were going over that shouldn't.
Well,
go
they've
there.
been going down
I
there for a long
misunderstood you,
time.
sorry.
The other thing is, that's why we're doing the Transportation Roadshow. Inflation has greatly damaged the ability of the state, counties, and cities to be able to deal with bridges like this. And in fact, if we were to deal with every bridge right now that needs assistance at the rate of spending that we have, the estimate is it would take 900 years. So we're very concerned about that bridge, and it's not the only one. In Medford, we went out to a bridge where one half of the two-lane bridge had collapsed and needs to be replaced, except they don't have any money for it. We saw another one where culverts are problems in the Tillamook area. So this is why we're getting the evidence that we will need to change the way transportation funding is done. And this just underscores that very, very well. And Multnomah County is aware that they don't have all of the resources they need, but none of the 36 counties do.
Okay, would you like to ask your opponent a question?
Sure. So my big question for you, Raymond, is your stand on things like MAGA and your stand on abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that you're pretty much following kind of the national playbook about that from the Republican side. So what's your opinion on a woman's right to choose?
I am a law and order guy. I think I've pretty much articulated that more than once in this setting, and anytime I talk with people in Rockwood, I would tell you, Chris, that, and I don't know if you do any door knocking or not, but when I talk
Of course
with,
I do, but that's all right. That's just another shot at me.
when I talk with people in Rockwood, they are not asking me about abortion. They're
Well,
not asking me about
he just
abortion.
did. so-
I'm going to answer them, but I just wanted to set this the table for.
All right, well, that's not my experience, but go ahead.
So when I said I'm a law and order guy, the law in Oregon is you can have an abortion. I have no problem with following the law. I will continue to follow the law. It would take a monumental shift in political power for that to not be the case. It's not a goal of mine. It's not a goal of the Republican Party to change that law in the near future at all. I believe that if a woman was raped or molested by someone, that she should be able to have an abortion. I firmly believe that. I don't think that I would never support a scenario where that woman could not pursue a medical remedy for such a horrible thing that happened to her, because I know women personally who've experienced that life traumatic bad decision. So I don't know what you've heard. I don't know what MAGA has to do with it.
I have heard that
I'd like to
you
make
were
East
happy.
County good again.
You were
instead of talking
happy about
medical.
Roe versus Wade passing or being taken out by the Supreme Court. What about that?
So if you look at that decision, and this is going into national politics, and I prefer to talk about East County and not
impacts
Medford
us
and
in Oregon
MAGA.
too.
Okay, so the law in Oregon, if you don't know, is
I'm
abortion
aware
is
of the
legal.
law in Oregon.
But I just stated what I believe, so I'm not sure what's the clarification question again.
Let me follow up
What
on
was
that.
it? Yeah, he said something, and I'm sorry, I just forgot.
I think he was asking you what your reaction was to Roe v. Wade.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Being struck
Yeah,
down.
absolutely. So I thought it was a fantastic ruling for one simple reason. Even people on both sides of the aisle politically, and I'm going back to, I think it was actually the year I was born, 72, somewhere in there, was the Roe versus Wade decision. It was not a great decision. We all know it wasn't a great decision. And the will of the people is what matters. And that decision, if you don't talk about the intricacies of what different states are ultimately going to do, it returned that decision back to the states, which is where I believe it belongs. And I am not an advocate of a national policy on either side. So I wouldn't be for a national ban any more than I would be for a national policy that says X, Y, or Z about abortion. I think it should be decided at the most local level possible, probably not lower than state, but quite frankly, I think the closer you get to people, when you go out and talk to everyday people and what's important to them, A, right now it's not that. They're talking about the economy, but B, if they are going to talk about
I
I will respectfully disagree.
Okay,
that-
well, either way, if they're went to
Yeah.
keep it on abortion,
Yeah.
I think women at the state level are best served when people in their local state have the power to decide how we in the collective state want to make that decision, not some bureaucrat in DC. I'm not a big fan of bureaucrats.
Yeah, so let me just follow up with a quick question. The 2020 election, very controversial in some circles.
Sure.
Who do you think won the presidential election?
Joe Biden won. Like, I don't. I mean, he's president. He's sitting in
Right,
office. So
right.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, there are
like,
some
it's
people.
not an opinion question.
There are some people in your party who would disagree with
That's
you, and
right.
I wanted to understand what your thinking was on that point. It's
So I think that the ballots were counted and Joe Biden won. That you can't deny that. So
Yeah.
I'm not an election denier, or MAGA or whatever he wants to say about
okay.
what happened in 2020. So
Okay, that's fair. I want to understand that there are, again, respectfully, there are people who have sat where you're sitting
That's
who are running for statewide office who have a different view.
who have denied that Joe Biden was a legitimately elected president.
Yeah, and I fully understand that not everybody in the Republican Party thinks
Right.
that way, and I wanted to clarify how.
I think it's a mistake, quite frankly, by the Republican Party to look backwards.
Right.
I think we should all look forward. I don't think it serves Chris or I or anyone else a lot of good to keep
Yep.
going back in
Yep.
time on either side, on
Yep.
a lot of issues.
I'd like to give you each a chance to say anything that you haven't said about either your own candidacy or your opponent. If you're going to talk about your opponent, let's make sure it's factual. Let's make sure it's fair. Take a minute or two, and then we'll have one final fun question that we ask all candidates. He went first last time, so Raymond will give you a chance to go first.
So I thought Chris hit it off well, and I echoed his shared vision. I think really that I think the voters want someone who is going to implement policies that are best served for them. I have never been in a political office before, but in my life experience, starting out from the Columbia Villa to present, it's never been my experience that if I go lock and stock barrel with someone, namely the Democratic Party, that everything is going to turn out great, any more so than if I go lock and stock with the Republican Party, that things are going to go great. I think we need to come back to some common sense solutions, get parents involved with education. One of the things that we didn't get a chance to talk about, but that I'm a huge advocate of, is tying education to parental involvement. I think if you get the parents involved and increase funding for children because their parents are engaged, teachers, and he would probably be able to echo this, teachers will tell you if your parents are involved, the student's going to have a better outcome. So we didn't get to a lot of those policy things today, but I'd like to have more policy discussions. I'd love to have more meetings with Chris to talk about those policy differences, because whether I win or lose, we're in a very blue state. He has a decided advantage just because of the political aisle that he sits in. But I think the policy things for East County, for Black people, for Hispanic community, are not well served by someone who hasn't lived and breathed that same repercussions of a lot of the policies that he advocates for. And so that's why I want a chance to lead in a different direction, from a different perspective that I think more people in East County would benefit from than what's going on now.
Okay, thank you. Senator?
What I would say is that bipartisan work is extremely important. And I have worked with my Republican counterparts recently on a couple of different things that were very important. One had to do with trying to get counties the right to recoup their costs when a utility is looking for right-of-way access. Prior to this, they have not been allowed to do that. And so I worked all last summer with Senator Finley from Eastern Oregon to get that passed in the legislature. I've also worked in terms of transportation. A lot of our work is bipartisan, and one of the things in working on the transportation package, we have to continue to not see that as a Republican or Democrat issue, but to see it as a statewide issue. Same thing in East County. Those are not Republican or Democrat problems. They are everybody's problems. And so I fully support working with the other side. And there's really a lot to be lost if we don't do that. The last thing I'll say is that we are somewhat divided in the state of Oregon, and yet many of the things that we do in the legislature, and this is a good thing, many of those things are bipartisan. In fact, probably at least 90% of the bills we pass are bipartisan. So we have to focus on public service. That's what I've been interested in since I was a little kid. And we have to make sure that we're trying to make things better for the people that live in our communities.
Okay, great. So we have one fun question that
Sure.
we ask all candidates in every race as a way to get our readers and our viewers to see a different side of them. And this year the fun question is,
What were you known for in high school?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
One fact check on him, since he hasn't been fact checked. His record does not show bipartisanship.
Oh, it absolutely does. I don't know what you're talking about. Show
Give you
some
one. I'll
numbers.
give you my flyer.
All right,
you can look at.
we'll take a look.
Get back to the fun question.
That's
So fun question. I was at one point, and I can't find the actual stat on Google, but I was the strongest bench press guy in high school in the state of Oregon. I was a competitive power lifter. I did a lot of wrestling. I loved wrestling. Everybody knew that I loved wrestling. And so I was that guy that like is the Mr. Stud or whatever.
What did you bench and what weight did you wrestle at?
I benched 380 pounds.
In high school?
In high school. And
How much did you weigh?
I was like 165 pounds, something like that.
Jesus.
That's amazing.
So,
That is
yeah,
amazing.
I
It is.
enjoyed powerlifting.
And you wrestled competitively?
I was not a great wrestler. I wrestled for PIL. I went to Roosevelt and
Yeah.
Benson. I wrestled for Mr. Lemon at Benson. He was great.
So
great
what
teacher.
did you wrestle at?
I wrestled at 148, and I think I ended up at 150, whatever the 150 class is,
Okay.
my senior year.
Okay. Chris, what were you known for in high school?
Well, I ran track and cross country the first couple of years, and in the 76 yearbook when I graduated, I was listed as most studious.
Okay. All right. So those are both good. We have had one candidate, the best one so far, I thought, was a guy who's like the worst player on. What was it? I was known as the worst player on my.
On the varsity
Oh
soccer.
no, that's terrible.
So-
Didn't
Poor
play
guy.
a minute.
Didn't play a minute.
this
Didn't play a
season.
minute. But he got.
He literally didn't play a minute the whole year.
Yeah.
That is so hard to sit on that bench.
Yeah. Well, listen. Thank you both very much. That was really informative, and thanks for taking the time to come.
Thank you.
Right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nice to actually have more than 30 seconds with you.
Yeah, there we go.
Sophie, I forget how to turn this on. If I remember.
Thanks again, guys. Have a good afternoon.
Okay.
Do I just go? I don't remember the way out here.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a ramp.